Free will is a hotly debated topic, with the lowest possible stakes. Lower than the existence of God, lunchtime arguments, politics, and even how a man in his garage could realistically make a rocket to get him to the moon, just so he can get some cheese. However, this cuts to the core of who we are and what it means to make a decision, if indeed we can. This was raised by science communicator Kyle Hill on his YouTube channel. And this is the very thing that inspired me to write this essay. Or did it? Kyle says that free will is just an illusion that gives us a sense of agency and accountability. But do his reasons and arguments really help explain this? Or is he, like many determinists, merely pushing an idea to avoid all of that and get them away out of potentially committing heinous crimes? Let's go over my experiences of the video and see how we can see if he changed my mind or not. I will quickly add that I do have a bit of an ear infection right now, and I think I'm starting to run a fever, so I apologise if I seem off, start wincing at random moments. That's just my ear being painful. Hopefully it won't interrupt the video too much. Also, while I'm on caveats, I will mention here, I know many people might say I'm slamming a science man because I'm religious and that's what I do. However, I've been watching Kyle's channel for years and followed him from his time at Nerdist. He communicates science very well, both in a nerdy way and in a practical way, and he has introduced ideas and information that has helped me understand the world and even aided in my own studies. Just because I may disagree with him on this point, even doing this video, doesn't change the fact I have immense respect for him, his work, his channel. I do this on the premise of free will, not to bash Kyle in particular. I don't know what he believes in the case of religion, and definitely don't think he believes the same. Quite frankly, I don't care, and for the purposes of this video, it doesn't matter. So with all that out of the way, let's crack on and see if Kyle can change my mind about free will. He starts off with the great causal chain explanation, using the choice of dinner as an example. He says that the decision is made by the brain. But where does that come from? And how much does it get involved? And how does that get informed? All of that goes back to the understanding that we really don't have much choice when it comes to how our brains ended up like that, who our parents were, the environment we grew up in, the genes that brought us all together, and so forth, and ultimately what we choose to have for dinner. I can see the rationale behind this, but this does raise the question of what the mind is, and whether our consciousness, as we know it, is merely electrical signals going off in our heads, or if it's something more. I've always felt like there was more to the human experience than just the sum of its parts. Similar to how music is so much more than just vibrations in the atmosphere, something I will cover in a video at some point. His exercise to show the ad hoc rationalisation didn't quite work with me either. When he said, choose a city, I went for Chicago. Why? Mostly because I watch clips of Chicago Fire, Chicago Med and Chicago PD. Also because, quite possibly, my girlfriend has a sister living in Chicago. His attempt to potentially influence decisions didn't work because in this instance, I'm rather stubborn and know that influence is part of what makes the modern magician so amazing. His suggestion that our lack of awareness of other cities disproves free will, but only shows the value of making an informed decision. Not that we have no control over making that decision in the first place. I don't know about cities like Caracas, Ryder, or Jinan. Therefore, I wouldn't have factored them into my choice. The fact I chose one he hadn't included on the screen and stuck with it is probably because I've watched a lot of quiz shows and trained my mind to rapid fire response. This could be ad hoc rationalisation, or could just be being self-aware. His further explanation using family members, cars and a number. I chose my niece, a Nissan Micra and the number 4. Didn't change it either. I talk about my niece a lot with people, and so she springs to mind very easily. The first car I drove independently and subsequently crashed was a Micra. And 4 was just a random number that I came up with within that moment and stuck with it. I wonder if he is simply projecting his own inner experience onto us. Because whilst I'm curious as to why I came up with the answers to random questions, I don't overthink them to the extent I wonder if I'm the one who was choosing them. Simply because the second I consider the brain as merely electrical signals going off, rationality no longer becomes a factor. Because how are those electrical discharges rational? Comparing it to a thunderstorm, whilst fascinating, doesn't always explain how structured our minds are and how they can understand themselves or even others. If anything, it removes the idea we can consider anything rational. Because it is self-defining, in a sense. It's not I don't believe in coincidence. Like, say, that we evolved from ape-like ancestors and grew up into genuine apes that were able to handle rocks, light fires, make a spear, and so forth. But a series of sequentially convenient coincidences, even to the most hardened randomist, must seem suspicious. You look at things like, say, criminal law, criminal investigations. It's those sorts of investigations, those sort of coincidences that you start to think, bit too convenient. The trick is recognising the difference and what is useful or not. I question if the feeling of free will was woven into our DNA, since throughout history, stories have been told about fate, destiny, the will of the gods, and the relentless inevitability of events. If anything, it is those who understand how to control one's own life that are sometimes seen as different. A weird example might be my great-grandparents. They probably wouldn't approve of my girlfriend based on her colour, but they were people of their time. That being said, my great-grandpa was a history teacher, so that could be something different. Could be something in his studies suggested something else, but who knows? I also believe in free will, but I have a make-do attitude when it comes to many things in life. I make do with my recording setup, my job, and the fact that I don't see my girlfriend as much as we would like. I could push for change, but that's not going to guarantee anything at this time. The only time that free will is definitely questionable is when our base urges come to the surface, like love, lust, fear, self-preservation, or cravings. These are most notable when our normal cognitive functions are impaired, like with drink or when hormones are raging around our systems. Now, many people might automatically think I'm referring to women, but teenage boys can respond to their hormones in far more devastating ways than just needing vast amounts of chocolate every month, or even gherkins at 4 AM on a Friday. My point is that it's when we're at our most vulnerable that our baser needs rise to the surface. Carl's examples of flow state or complete removal of decision-making responsibilities don't necessarily match up here. Yes, I prefer knowing what I'm doing for work tomorrow, or even when I'm working at all. But I'm willing to accept that I get overwhelmed with options and chaos due to my dyspraxia. I drive because it's a skill I've mastered, and may struggle to rethink if I'm changing vehicles, as happened today. But it only takes a short time to consciously adapt. And again, it could just be me with my coordination. Training and practice lead to instincts and muscle memory being built. But all the examples given by me and Carl need conscious training to start it. And even then, habits can lead you wrong. Just today, for example, I drove right past my customer's destination because I was far too focused on something else. And I just went on autopilot. It happens, unfortunately. Sometimes we need to allow our instincts to take over in certain situations, like in a fight. But in that instance, we need to remember that we had to train ourselves to be in those habits to start off with. The examples of men going on murder-suicide sprees are tragic examples of us losing control in a negative way. But different things stood out to me in these examples. The note by Mr. Whitman pointed out that he was aware of these strange thoughts and compulsions. And he actually said that it takes great mental effort to focus on more positive things. Tumours are no laughing matter, and they should not be ignored like this. But it's worthwhile noting that he was aware of these things and attempted to resist, even though, no matter how strong you are, those things can be terrible, and we lose control. That again is an example of us being at our lowest, being at our most vulnerable, the darker things. Also the fact the examples were all men, and social norms, especially at the time, were that men did not need help and apparently didn't have mental health issues, shows that these were products of our societal structure, not our biological defects. Similar to how witch hunts of old Britain were possibly targeting women with dementia, purely because of their strange and out-of-character actions. Comparing it with animals isn't unfair. Since when biology takes over, we aren't that far removed, but I think the environment is very much a different thing to consider when it comes to this. With animals, it's very particular. Harumba may have been rough on that child, but when you're a 200-kilogram silverback gorilla and there's lots of noise going on around you, handling a human child like that isn't as bad as one might think. If anything, it seemed fairly gentle to me. I was far more focused on the actions of the people who were screaming at him. They didn't know what they're doing and just yelling at the gorilla, leave him alone. Clearly wasn't going to work, it just made it worse. The same is true with Timothy Treadwell, who was in a place and situation of heightened danger. This would imply to me the need for informed decisions by the humans, not the animals. Thus, I would never blame the animals in this case. However, if we have pride in our brains, we should use them better to avoid the situations. Hence why I personally, even though I believe that if you know what you're doing and have respect for the animal, you have nothing to fear, I would not only avoid a beach with shark warnings in place, a bear wandering past, or a gorilla in distress, but also, if I had to choose, I would take a man who is clearly struggling with dark thoughts and destructive compulsions to a place where they can't hurt anyone, even knowing that that is the very thing that would discourage others who might be suffering from the very same thing from seeking the help that they clearly need. To call us victims of biology is a bit much, especially when we can perceive the differences and even train animals to do the same. In many situations, we can handle ourselves. Many people might be terrified of my dog being anywhere near my nephew, as much as he is terrified of her. But I know the dog will never hurt him. It is this that makes me think that the penal system is justified, even if we don't think we have control, when we can, in some ways, do. It's not about having those thoughts and feelings that makes them immoral, as one might say about homosexual feelings. It's about acting on them. Having sexual thoughts doesn't make you a rapist, but looking at someone in that way makes you perverted. And acting on them, that's something else. It's when rational humans try to use the examples of a lack of free will to justify their actions as natural instincts. That is when this mindset changes the way we think and justify things, when we can, with all reasonableness, refrain from doing this. It's only when our bodies are negatively affect us that we can't resist our instincts, and thus we cannot be held responsible. Both nature and nurture being responsible for you as a person is a worthwhile study, but it doesn't eclipse decisions individuals make. It only acts as a mitigation factor. Poor family dynamics and gang involvement doesn't mean you can't walk away from this, if shown there's a better way. It shouldn't eliminate the punishment, but help implement different methods of handling it in a productive manner. The fMRI tests that supposedly showed that our brains activate to show we have made a decision before we acknowledge that we have, not only have people in the scientific community debating, as Kyle mentioned, but I can see a problem first off. Well, the test. Press a button when you sense that you're making a decision. What part of the brain is lighting up at that moment? The part of the brain, the part where you made a decision? The part where you decide to press the button, or the part that makes you press the button. We would assume they did control tests to eliminate some of those factors, but since it was mentioned as a caveat to the deterministic outlook that Kyle seemed to be pushing, we can imply they didn't. Add that to the rabbit hole Kyle mentions going down back to the origin of decisions, and we're nowhere near finding the answer than when we first started. His reference to the only explanation for free will being a totally external being, separate from the nature of the world, does sound like logical proof of God, though not physical. However, I am not going to use this in an argument here, since it's completely separate from the discussion. However, his position on the moral aspect of this, being understanding and thus compassionate towards those who merely have a different brain to us, is worthwhile considering. To use the phrase "unlucky to be them" can sound a lot like "sucks to be you," which is also a negative way of looking at it. But it does help us to remember that in life, some people are just in bad circumstances and need help, not punishment. This is uncomfortable. But as we know, the place that needs the most work is the place we don't want to go. Kyle is right about that. Having dyspraxia, which some say is on the autistic spectrum, potential for ADHD, and having similar hairstyles, which is not intentional, by the way, I feel a kindred spirit with Kyle, despite likely many religious and philosophical differences. Our intentions are always to promote study, communicate our particular interests to the betterment of all, and show the world in a clearer light than most people seem to do. For example, showing scientific discoveries in his case, and in my case, interpretations of the Bible. His videos showed me the major factors to consider in the deterministic worldview, in a more concise and accessible way, but hasn't convinced me that free will is an illusion. My main reasons being self-improvement. If we are built this way, how can we improve ourselves without having any external force tell us otherwise? Breaking free from addictions, it's always hard to do that, and we need to literally rewire our brains in that case. And countless people making drastic changes to their worldviews and lifestyles, be it to religion or from religion, without external influence beyond everyday human interactions. My own beliefs have gone from one to the other in my lifetime and are still evolving as my studies progress. Whilst I don't plan on converting anyone, I do intend to share my studies and let other people decide. Just because I don't want to force you doesn't mean I don't think it's possible, or that you can't change. We choose ourselves, and we can choose. At least that's what I believe. So thanks for the video, Kyle. I salute you. Your work is amazing. Keep it up. I recommend anyone watching this go check out Kyle Hill and his many scientific communication videos. They are worthwhile watching. And for you guys watching, thank you so much. Stay safe, and God be with you, my friends.